Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Shake Sales. I'm your host, Maggie Blume, the sales evangelist at Mailshake. And today we are talking about transforming sales in 2023. And I really think this is the best person to talk about this. It's Leslie Venetz, founder at Sales Team Builder LLC. We were just talking beforehand. We're both Chicago residents, so I'm always excited to talk with people who live in Chicago because that could be a whole podcast within itself of me talking about restaurants or things to do there. But Leslie, thank you so much for being here. Do you mind taking some time to introduce yourself?
Oh my gosh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. And you're so right. We could use our entire time just listing all of the things we love to eat and do in Chicago. But instead, we will talk about the state of sales in 2023. Appreciate your very kind introduction. Yes, I am the founder of Sales Team Builder, which is a sales consulting company. And we spend a lot of time working on outbound motions that help folks talk with their prospects, their buyers, instead of just at them, which is something I know you are passionate about as well. And a new full-time founder, which I think is pretty exciting. I've been building this business on the side for about 4-5 years as a passion project. So really just having a blast coming into my own as a full-time entrepreneur post like corporate America sales. So excited, especially excited on that front to see what 2023 has in store.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and making that transition there. And yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to talk with you today. Selfishly, I love talking about buyers in the sales world and just like their point of view, learning more about them. And I think it's one of the most important things that we can do as salespeople, but that's what we'll get into today. So I want to break this up into about 3 parts: hiring processes, the actual sales processes, and like we were talking about with buyers. And then we'll talk a little bit about bro culture too in sales and how there needs to be a bit of transformation there. But to get right into it, I read a story recently that you posted on LinkedIn that was pretty vulnerable about a hiring process that you had last year that honestly sounded like a nightmare. And I wouldn't say that you're the only person that's gone through that. I mean, your situation, I feel like, was especially, there was a lot of like a ton of different layers to it, but we hear processes like this or people getting stuck in processes that are just not great, especially in the sales world. But how do you feel like we can transform this process in hiring salespeople?
Oh my gosh. I think there are so many things that we can do. Some really easy things that we can do are removing artificial gates to encourage more folks to apply to sales roles, like to apply to the profession of sales in general and particular goals or roles. So removing those gates could look like removing the need for a 4-year degree if the role like really doesn't require it. Totally. Something that I love to see on job adverts is that bit at the end that's like, even if you don't feel like you meet 100% of the criteria, please still apply. We are looking for talent with a diverse set of lived experiences. So, I mean, I feel like those are really easy asks as well. Like that's not a big lift, doesn't cost money, doesn't cost or doesn't, require some institutional change. In that story that you read on LinkedIn, I think it spoke to some more maybe systematic issues. For folks that didn't read the story, there were definitely some layers of gaslighting, some layers of sexism, time wasted, absolutely. And to your point, Maggie, like I'm not the only person that has experienced that. I know a lot of our peers, other women in sales that I talk to, have experienced sexism. And some of it is not overt. Like some of it's just that sense of it, but some of it's as overt as, well, how do you plan to work while managing children? Stuff like that is still commonplace. And I don't think folks realize how common conversations like that is. I mean, in that example I shared, they pulled out the benefits package from my total comp. And then when I pushed back, they said, I don't understand why you would even need benefits. It's not like you have children. Like somehow I'm like, damned. I don't know if we can curse. Too late. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like if you have kids and you're a woman in sales, then it's like, how do you balance it? If you don't, it's like, well, that's not the traditional role you should be playing. Why do you even deserve to be treated like a full human? So I think
big eye roll.
Yeah, biggest eye roll, right? So I think some of those issues are very specific to maybe being like an other in sales, but something that I am pretty sure that everybody who has ever interviewed for a job has experienced is just like an unnecessarily long interview process.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I feel like they're getting longer. Is that sort of your sense as well?
Yeah. And I think like it's the same thing because we're speaking to a sales audience here. I used to be a recruiter for salespeople actually, but it's like the same thing with sales. Like if you're not giving all that information of what you can promise up front and you drag someone through a sales cycle, just like you drag someone through an interview cycle, which happened in your situation, it's like, that is so much time wasted. Even at the end, if you decide not to work there, like, am I going to refer my friend over to that company? Absolutely not, just for that alone. I mean, obviously there were so many other factors in that were just horrible, but just that factor alone of like, this person just like dragged me along for something that I asked for in the beginning and I was straightforward with. And it's the same thing we see in sales and interviewing too. It's just like ridiculous.
That's such a good analogy. And truly at the end of that process, one of the biggest takeaways for me was, why would they want to hire that version of me? Like, why would they want to hire a VP of sales that they were able to manipulate in that way, that they were able to like totally screw over in a negotiation? Why are you doing those things to your potential sales executive if those are not the same types of behaviors that you would want to see them embody in the role?
Seems like a simple question that people just still don't get. So right. Yeah, it's exactly just thinking about it that way. It's like, why would you want someone on the team where you've shorted them in like a few different ways and you treated them like this? Like first, hopefully that person doesn't take the job, but even if they do, it's like, what type of relationship are you starting all the way from the first interview that you had with them, that long interview process too?
Yeah. And like, I think your analogy of sales process versus recruiting process is so apt, because when we think about what's optimal in a sales process, it is creating a process that's frictionless. Like, how much money do we spend investing in getting shorter sales cycles to get to the goal faster, and figuring out how to like still within that tight timeline, like optimize for getting the best type of customers onboarded as quickly as possible. And yet then as sales leaders, we so often drop the ball in bringing those like same priorities and same learnings over to recruiting processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, recruiting is like like you said, like a sales process. Obviously it's way more intricate than that. There's a lot of other things to consider because there's a human involved. I mean, there's a human involved in everything in sales as well, but it's like a job, which is a lot more than just buying a product. But I think there's a lot of same strategies that you can take a look at or just think. And I think it goes back to asking yourself those simple questions of like, why would someone want to go through a whole interview process like this if they're applying to the same job where it's maybe the same money and it's a shorter cycle and they feel like they're trusted more in a shorter cycle? And I'm not saying it has to be like one interview and you're done, because then that kind of doesn't feel right either, but just having it meet right in the middle there.
I think that's spot on. So here's another question for you as somebody that recruited salespeople. And I don't have the answer for this. I'm still figuring it out for myself, but there is a dialogue I see a lot in like the sort of, executive sales leader communities about whether or not you should do a project as part of your interview process. And if a project is required, if you don't get the job, should you be compensated for that, or should you charge up front? Because so often the people that are applying for these roles, like that's the type of work they do in their side businesses, they do charge thousands of dollars for. So like, why should this company get it for free, particularly if they don't ultimately offer you the job? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I hired less with executive or C-suite level or VP level, and I think that does make a difference. We did have, but I have one example of a great way that someone did this. We did have a process when I recruited SDRs where they did a mock voicemail. So it was very like, they did it within the interview. They could do it that way, or they could do it afterwards. So it was very minimal time. But I think I've heard companies where that someone works on a project and they get paid hourly for that work. So they bill hourly off of that work. They say, hey, we want you to, work with us for a day, for example. You'll get involved in some Slack channels, you'll have a project, and we're going to pay you for that day. So I think like, depending on the amount or time of work that they want you to put into it, I think, and for most executives and VPs, that is a decent amount of time for the projects that people ask. I think definitely pay for that, especially if it's a candidate that's made it that far. That means that it's someone who's up in the ringer and someone who you really want. So show them that you care of it. But yeah, I think there's some creative ways to do it. And I think that it's fair to get compensated for it too.
Oh, I like that. I like that answer. And it's a good point that like at that point in the interview process, it is like probably 2 or 3 people. Yeah. So it's not this huge outlay of cash. It's maybe a few $1,000s to treat the people that you're interviewing, like respect their time. And like thinking of myself, if I was a finalist and somebody said, hey, we want to do you this project, but we really want to make sure that you're compensated because we know and respect, like we know how valuable your time is and respect your time. That would make me want that job so much more.
Yeah. It's just having that company stand out as an employer. And if they're really serious and they really take care of their people, you're going to notice that from when you're going through that interview process too. It's a subject, super passionate about recruiting. And yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities you can draw from just sales in general with it. Again, there's some differences there too, but I know you mentioned this a little bit and we were talking about like lengths of interviews or sales processes. And I heard you once say that being clear about who your buyer is should be at the center of your entire sales process. So for people listening right now, I think it's one of those things that it seems like it could be a simple thing to do when we think about it a bit more, but we try to like muck it up and make it complicated. So for sales leaders or reps listening, like what would be 3 tips that they could just do today to become more buyer-centric?
To become more buyer-centric, the first thing I would do is like genuinely look at your scripts or your email copy, whatever it is, so however you're primarily communicating, and ask yourself, is this about me or is this about them? Because most of the time, if you're being honest with yourself, it is about you. You're going to see a ton of I language, of we language, a lot of feature driving. We get these emails in our inboxes. I'm sure everybody listening has, seen the screenshots on LinkedIn at the very least. So I would say the first thing I would do is just like an audit of your communications and to challenge yourself to be like, is this really about them? Like, is this really valuable? Am I actually giving them a reason to read this email, to give me time in their inbox, to give me time in their brain to consider my product? I would say that's the first thing. I would say the second thing, and this is going to vary depending on who your persona is that you're selling to, but I am such a huge advocate of relevant deposits before asks. So an example might be something simple, just like leaving a meaningful comment on a LinkedIn post.
Okay.
Or maybe it's a little bit more robust, like sharing a link to a relevant blog or white paper or webinar, but something that allows you to build just a bit of credibility, of reciprocity before you go in for that straight ask. Or maybe it's like a smaller, like the call to action is click on this link to take advantage of this resource versus like, click on my URL to book in a meeting with me. I really love that one. And one small addition I would make to really keep it buyer-centric and really make sure that you're not just like sharing a resource to check the box, you're doing it to be helpful, is don't share like a 20-page white paper. Share the white paper, fine, but the email should say like, make sure to take a look at page 12 based on whatever, your CEO report, your new, whatever it is, whatever that trigger event is. I think that's going to be especially beneficial because then you're not sending them this like huge overwhelming thing. You're like, just take a look at that one page. And like, I think a third one, and this will probably resonate with you and folks that are signing up for or showing up for this particular type of conversation. It's just to make your emails easier to digest. Like, stop writing multi-paragraph emails. Stop writing emails that you're writing to make yourself sound smart that are a way that you would like literally never communicate in real life. Like, just be a little bit more human in your communication. So those would be my things. Like, actually make it valuable for them. Lead with that deposit before the ask, and like, don't be afraid of being human.
Yeah. And the deposit before the ask, I think, is so important from the way that you mentioned it, because I've even done this when I was an SDR and I'm like, I sent them a free resource. Like, I don't know why they're not responding to me, but I would send them like, here's like this link to this 20-page white paper we did about whatever. And I never called out what was important about it. Like, send screenshot it. And it also goes to your third point of like, make it easy for them to want to respond, make it easy for them to figure out how you gave them value and everything along those lines. So love all those tips. And I think it's, again, one of those things that sounds so simple when we're thinking about it right now when we're discussing it, but it's like, for some reason, like do an audit, make sure that you know exactly how this message is resonating with someone else in there. And I think it's just something that we always feel like we could save for another day, but it's not going to help us.
Yeah. Like, sales is such an interesting profession because we are always chasing a really specific number, right? Like, in the profession of sales, marketing, customer success, like in the commercial profession, like, success isn't elusive. Like, we very clearly know if we have succeeded or failed. Like, it's a set number. And I think because it is a set number, it's very easy to get like head down and extremely focused on that, which, then on the converse can make it challenging to take that step back, to like lift up, to have that time where you block an afternoon to do an audit or block time for more like intentional or strategic work. But what I've found is that, like, as I've grown in my career, the more time I take out and like really hold as time to be more strategic about how I'm approaching conversations, my territory, my copy, like whatever it is, the more successful I am. And that doesn't mean I'm taking like an hour to research before I send one single email, but just sort of big picture thinking about like, what am I trying to accomplish here? And how can I earn the right to my buyer's attention along the way?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you said, it's not something that could take hours, but just taking that one step back or that one look back through a different lens, I think, could be super, super helpful.
I really have like a halo behind me. It's all that beautiful Chicago sunlight. I'm like, oh.
An hour on them right now. Do we have time for one last question, Leslie?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So this one is kind of just selfishly something that I feel like I've talked with my friends a lot and other women in sales of, and some conversations that you've had about women in sales and how you're on a mission to transform that side of sales as well, to be more inclusive. So for people who are in, for women who are in positions where they feel like they're in the bro culture or they're being mansplained, whether it be with their teammates or even with their buyers that they're presenting to, I kind of like to call it sales splain when I go through those processes. But like for people who are going through it, because it's not just easy to say like, hey, just quit, because obviously there's a lot more intricate things that come from that when we're in this bro culture. But like, what's advice that you could give to women that are going through this right now?
It's such a hard question. So let me approach it from a couple of different ways. And first is just being really honest that like in my 20s, I was terrible at this. Like I was terrible at like speaking up and holding space and like all the things that I like advocate for and fight for and recommend now, I was really, really bad at in my 20s. And I think that is certainly part of why I feel called to try to transform the culture so that the expectation isn't on the shoulder of women to have to fight to take up space and fight to be heard in meetings and get a seat at the table and feel safe at work. So I just think that's important to mention, because I don't know who's listening, but like, if you're struggling with this, like it's okay. Like it's okay to be like, you know, fearful or unsure of how you want to take up space or if you feel safe even speaking up. So just throwing that out there. As I have grown in my career, I'm also now in like a much more privileged position. Like I'm pretty safe, right? Like I have a pretty sexy brag book, like set of accolades, good network, where I feel a lot more confident speaking up because I know less harm can be done to me. Whereas it frankly can like really jeopardize your career to stand up for yourself earlier on. So those are just caveats to be like,
sure,
if you feel safe doing it, if you feel confident doing it, if you're in a position emotionally, mentally, financially where you can do it, do it. If you're not, like, don't beat up on yourself. If you are in that place, honestly, like one of my favorite techniques is pulling it straight out of the Chris Voss playbook, where somebody says something sexist, microaggression, whatever, and you're just like, you repeat, like it's called mirroring, where you repeat 1 to 3 words back of the sentence they said. So like I was on a call today with a coaching client who wanted to send out a welcome email. Pretty basic, right? A welcome email to new customers. And her boss said to her, Maggie, sure, if you want to take on some of those more motherly aspects, you can.
What?
Okay, so like first and foremost, what? But in the situations, often the most powerful response is motherly. And like make that person talk through why that's motherly. And maybe they try to, you know, like mother is nurture. That's like nurturing, like nurturing. And just keep asking those mirroring questions. I found that has worked really well for me, because then I don't have to like try to think of something like smart or like a quip. I can just be like, mothering. So I feel like that's a hot tip that anybody can take and use. And then I think I'd pair that with like really lean into your community, because being in those types of cultures can feel really isolating. It can feel lonely. It can make you, at least it made me, like question if this was even the right profession for me, like a profession I so deeply, deeply love. So make sure that you find other women, other advocates to connect with, so that you can share those stories and get that external perspective, and just like know that you're not alone.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And to back it up to what you said, I think it depends on where you're at in your career too. Like you said, like now you feel a bit more comfortable, safe. But yeah, there's people I talk to, women I talk to, that don't feel safe in that position or don't have the means to feel like they can stand up. But I love that simple trick of mirroring, because you're not saying anything, you're just repeating back exactly what they said. So if they take offense to it at all, then they shouldn't have been saying it in the first place to you. I think we can relate like everything back to sales if we wanted to, recruiting, bro culture, and just using some of those tactics in there. But no, thank you so much. And Leslie, I believe you're part of this group too, Women in Sales, in this Slack community that I've seen you post about too, right? Do you feel like that's a good place for women to go to?
Yeah, absolutely. GB and Alexine are just really building a super special community over there. I love it. I've also found really great groups of women in communities like Sales Hacker, Rev Genius, which are totally free to join. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to like find that community. Frankly, I have like just literally Googled like top women in sales lists and then sent invites to all of them just so I have more women on my news feed talking about sales and marketing, customer success and DEI. And that's really helped me make important connections as well.
Amazing. No, I love it. And there's so many great communities that, make us feel less alone, especially if we're working remote or we're the only woman on our team or anything like that, that can help us feel more together. But Leslie, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about transforming sales in 2023. I actually just do have one last question for you before we finish up. So, and this is kind of like a rapid fire. I just want to get your thoughts. What's like a sales interview question that you wish more hiring managers should ask?
That the hiring manager would ask? Oh my gosh.
Am I putting too much on this?
Yeah, no, I'm like, that more hiring managers would ask. I'm not sure if maybe that it's like, would you like to see our dashboards?
Gotcha. Okay.
I feel like more hiring managers should take the onus upon themselves to like walk it like they talk it. And if they're dangling the carrot of these incredible comp plans in front of hires, to like back it up, to be like, here's our dashboard of 80% of our team at or above quota. So that would be that's like a dream question and like an ideal world, which we're not in. But like, would you like to see how much of our team is at quota?
Yeah, no, totally. And it's kind of putting them in the shoes of, being proud of it, feeling like they're not hiding anything from there too. But awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering those questions today and talking with us, Leslie. If anyone wants to learn a little bit more about Leslie, you can follow her on LinkedIn or go to Sales Team Builder and learn more from there. But awesome. Thanks so much again, Leslie.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you, Maggie.
All right. And thanks everyone for listening to another episode of Shake Sales. Bye.